Broke black man fixes stranded woman's engine. The next day, a helicopter lands at his trailer. What if one simple act of kindness could change your life forever? A broke mechanic helped a stranded woman fix her car. He never imagined it would lead to a life-changing opportunity that would turn everything around. Stay tuned to see how one unexpected moment turned into the chance of a lifetime. Please, before you start watching this story, support us by giving this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where you're watching from. It was a typical morning in rural Texas when Marcus Sullivan, a mechanic with a broken-down pickup truck and little more than a few tools to his name, was doing what he knew best, trying to keep things running. His small trailer sat on a patch of land on the outskirts of town, the faded paint of his trailer reflecting years of wear. Marcus had never had much, but he took pride in his work. His hands were calloused, his clothes often stained with grease, but in his heart, he carried a quiet hope. It had been a tough few months. Business had slowed down, and it seemed like no one had the money to repair their cars, much less buy new ones. Marcus had a few loyal customers, but they were few and far between. He made just enough to scrape by, but with the trailer's rent looming and his truck still on the fritz, Marcus knew he needed a break. That's when she showed up. The sound of tires crunching over gravel broke Marcus from his thoughts. Looking up from his workbench, he saw a sleek, black SUV pull up in front of his trailer. The engine of the vehicle sputtered and stalled as it came to a stop, leaving the driver stranded on the side of the dusty road. Marcus didn't think much of it at first. People with money didn't usually stop by his place, but as the driver stepped out of the car, he saw something unexpected. The woman was in her 30s, tall with flawless skin and sharp features. Her clothes were expensive, designer brands that most folks around here could only dream of. She didn't fit the image of someone who would be caught on a back road, miles from the nearest town. She looked under the hood of her SUV, frowning at the engine like she could will it to start. After a few moments of trying, her face twisted in frustration. She didn't seem to know much about cars. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag and made his way over to her. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice a little rough. The woman looked up, startled at first, and then gave a tight smile. "I don't think so, but thanks." Marcus took a step closer and peered into the engine. "Looks like your alternator's gone bad. I can fix it for you." She hesitated for a moment, clearly not used to asking for help, but then, with a resigned sigh, she nodded. "Okay, if you can get it done today, I'd appreciate it. I have a meeting in the city." Marcus, never one to shy away from a challenge, pulled out his toolkit and went to work. The air was thick with the smell of oil and metal as he carefully dismantled parts of the engine, his hands moving with the precision of years of experience. The woman watched him for a while, but as the sun climbed higher, she pulled out her phone and made a few calls. Minutes turned into hours, and just as Marcus finished putting everything back together, the SUV roared to life. The woman stepped out of the car, a surprised look on her face. "Wow, you really fixed it. Thanks a lot," she said, her voice softer than before. Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead. "No problem." It was a simple fix. The woman paused, her eyes scanning Marcus as if trying to place him. She clearly wasn't used to being around people like him. After a moment, she smiled again, this time more warmly. "I owe you more than just a thank you. What's your name?" "Marcus Sullivan," he replied. "I'm Vanessa Westbrook," she said, extending her hand. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. You've got skills." With that, she climbed back into her SUV, started it up, and drove off, leaving a cloud of dust in her wake. Marcus stood there for a moment, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. Little did he know, that simple act of kindness would change his life forever. The next morning, Marcus woke up to the sound of his alarm blaring. He rubbed his eyes, sat up on the edge of his bed, and stared at the peeling walls of his trailer. Another day of scraping by. The reality had begun to wear him down, but he pushed the thoughts aside. He had bills to pay, and if he was lucky, he'd get a customer today. He threw on a faded t-shirt and some work pants and made his way outside to get to work. The early morning Texas heat was already thick in the air. and his bones felt the familiar ache from working on cars in all sorts of weather. But today felt different. As he stepped out of his front door, his eyes landed on something that made his heart skip a beat. A shiny black helicopter sitting in the middle of his gravel driveway. Marcus blinked a few times, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. The rotor blades were slowly winding down, and the helicopter was emblazoned with a sleek logo he didn't recognize. The sun gleamed off its polished surface, and Marcus felt an unfamiliar lump in his throat. "What the hell?" he muttered under his breath. The helicopter's doors opened, and out stepped two well-dressed men in sharp suits. They walked toward him with a confident, almost businesslike air, as if they owned the land beneath their feet. "Mr. Sullivan?" one of them asked, his voice calm and collected. Marcus took a few steps forward, his head spinning. Yeah, that's me. Can I help you?" The man smiled slightly, his eyes scanning the worn trailer. "We're here on behalf of Ms. Vanessa Westbrook." Marcus's stomach dropped. "Vanessa?" The man nodded. "She was quite impressed with your work yesterday. She asked us to come and deliver an offer to you. If you're interested." Marcus's mind raced. Vanessa, the woman with the fancy car and expensive clothes, had sent these men? For him? He hadn't done anything extraordinary. He fixed her SUV. That was it. "What kind of offer?" Marcus asked, his voice unsure. The man gave a quick glance to his companion before looking back at Marcus. "Ms. Westbrook owns a number of businesses in the city. She's been searching for a mechanic to handle some high-end vehicles. Your reputation has reached her, and she'd like to make you a proposal." Marcus was still trying to make sense of what was happening. Yesterday, he was barely getting by, and now a helicopter had landed in his driveway to talk about a job offer. He was sure he was dreaming. I don't know if I understand," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "I'm just a mechanic. I don't do anything special." The second man spoke up, his tone professional. "Ms. Westbrook values skill over status. She's looking for someone who doesn't mind working with high-end cars, restoring them to perfection. She believes you have what it takes." The words started to sink in. Marcus had heard of people who made it big from their skills, but he never thought that would be him. "You're telling me she wants me to work for her?" The first man nodded. "Exactly. She wants to meet you in person. She'll cover all travel expenses to bring you to the city. The helicopter is yours to take you back. The offer is yours if you choose to accept." Marcus stood there, mouth agape, as the two men waited patiently for his answer. His mind was a blur. Everything he had worked for, everything he thought was out of reach, was suddenly in his grasp. "Do you have any questions, Mr. Sullivan?" the second man asked, clearly eager to hear his response. Marcus took a deep breath. "When do we leave?" Marcus had never been in a helicopter before, and the feeling of weightlessness as it took off was like nothing he'd ever experienced. The blades cut through the air with a low hum, and as the ground below him shrank, he couldn't help but feel like he was being pulled into a world that didn't belong to people like him. The vast Texas landscape stretched out beneath him, the small houses and dusty roads a distant memory as the helicopter soared higher. The two men from earlier were silent now, their stoic expressions betraying no emotion. But Marcus couldn't keep the questions from swirling in his mind. Who was Vanessa Westbrook, really? What did she see in him, a small-town mechanic who barely scraped by? What could someone like him possibly offer her in return for the opportunity she was presenting? As the helicopter sliced through the sky, Marcus found himself looking out at the horizon, his mind racing. He was so used to living day to day, always wondering if he'd have enough money to fix the truck or pay the rent. Now he was being flown to the city, into a world he didn't understand, to meet someone who might change his life forever. Within an hour, they were descending toward a private airstrip, and Marcus could make out the outline of a massive mansion just beyond the runway. The helicopter touched down gently, and the two men ushered him out, guiding him toward a sleek black SUV waiting nearby. The moment Marcus stepped out, the heat of the city hit him like a wall, hotter than anything he had ever felt in his small town. The driver was quiet as they made their way toward the mansion. Marcus watched the city pass by, skyscrapers rising high above the streets, the bustle of people and cars a far cry from the sleepy rural town he called home. The mansion loomed in front of him as they pulled up, an opulent estate that looked like it belonged in a movie. White marble pillars framed the entrance, and the sprawling grounds were dotted with carefully manicured gardens. Marcus felt like an intruder in this world. As the driver opened the door for him, Marcus stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel driveway. He stood for a moment, taking it all in, this grand, unfamiliar place. The door to the mansion opened, and a tall woman in a sharp business suit appeared. "Marcus Sullivan, I presume?" she asked, her voice smooth and confident. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his nerves evident as he shook her hand. "I didn't expect all this." Vanessa Westbrook smiled warmly, her eyes studying him. "I like to offer opportunities, Mr. Sullivan, not just jobs. Please come inside. I think you'll find our conversation interesting." Inside, the mansion was even more breathtaking. Expensive furniture, elegant artwork, and chandeliers that sparkled with the kind of wealth Marcus had only seen in magazines surrounded him. His eyes wandered, trying to take it all in. Vanessa led him into a spacious living room, where she gestured for him to take a seat. She walked over to a bar and poured them both a drink. "Please have a seat." "Can I offer you something?" she asked, handing him a glass of water. Marcus accepted the glass, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong here. He had spent most of his life working on cars in a tiny trailer, and now he was sitting in a mansion, sipping water from a crystal glass. "Thank you for taking the time to come here," Vanessa said, sitting down across from him. "I know this must all be overwhelming, but I've been following your work for a while. You've got a rare talent, Marcus, a gift with cars, and I think you could help me with something very important." Marcus felt a surge of pride, mixed with a little disbelief. "I'm just a guy who fixes things." Vanessa's smile widened. "That's where you're wrong. You're not just a guy. You're someone who can make a difference in a world that's often focused on appearance, not function. I want you to help me restore some of the most expensive, unique cars in the world. I need someone who can do more than just fix engines. I need someone who can bring these machines back to life." Marcus's mind whirred. Restore cars? He had worked on everything from classic muscle cars to the occasional luxury vehicle, but he wasn't sure if he was ready for this kind of responsibility. Still, the offer in front of him was too big to ignore. "And if I say yes?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Vanessa leaned in slightly, her tone turning more serious. "If you accept, I'll make sure you have everything you need, top-tier tools, access to the best cars, a salary that will make your current earnings look like pocket change. And more than that, I'll ensure you have the freedom to build your own future, not just work for someone else." Marcus sat back, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just a job offer, it was an opportunity to change everything. "Think it over, Marcus. I know it's a lot to take in, but I believe in your skills, and I want you to believe in yourself." Marcus stared at the glass in his hand. He had spent his entire life working on cars for people who barely appreciated him. But this was different. The chance to work on the finest cars in the world, to make a name for himself, to build something more than just a trailer and a broken-down truck. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. But could he really make the leap? Marcus sat in the lavish living room of Vanessa Westbrook's mansion, the weight of her offer pressing down on him. He stared at the crystal glass in his hand, the water inside now rippling with the subtle tremor of his fingers. Outside, the sound of the city echoed faintly in the distance, reminding him of the life he had left behind just hours ago. He had gone from a mechanic with little more than a trailer and a toolbox to sitting in a mansion with a businesswoman who owned some of the most valuable cars in the world. His mind raced as he considered her words. Everything she had said was tempting. More money, more opportunities, more recognition. It was the kind of life he had never even dared to imagine for himself. But there were doubts. Real, deep-rooted doubts. What if he wasn't good enough? What if he couldn't handle the pressure of working on those expensive, high-end cars? Sure, he could fix engines, repair transmissions, and restore the occasional luxury vehicle, but he had never worked with anything like the cars Vanessa described. Would they trust him? Would he be able to keep up with the pace of the wealthy clients who expected perfection? Vanessa's voice broke through his thoughts. I know you're worried, Marcus, but I wouldn't be offering you this opportunity if I didn't believe in your potential. Her words made him feel a little better, but the uncertainty still gnawed at him. I'm not used to this kind of thing, Marcus said quietly, setting the glass down on the coffee table. I mean, I've always worked with old cars, the classics, the muscle cars, the ones people care about because they remind them of something, some era, some memory. But you're talking about luxury cars. I've never worked on anything like that. I'm just a mechanic from a small town. Vanessa smiled. And that's exactly why I want you. You're not like the others. You're not looking for recognition or status, Marcus. You just want to fix things. You've got a passion for the craft, and that's what's important. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. The cars I work with, they're not just machines to me. They're pieces of art, and I need someone who can appreciate them the way I do. People like you don't come around often, Marcus. I can tell you've got the skills, and if you trust me, I'll make sure you have the support you need to succeed. Marcus exhaled, trying to process everything she was saying. It sounded too good to be true. He'd spent so many years struggling, barely making ends meet, always wondering if he'd ever catch a break. And now here was Vanessa, offering him the chance to make something of himself, to step into a world of wealth and opportunity. The temptation to say yes was overwhelming, but the fear of failure still held him back. He wasn't sure if he was ready to risk everything for something that could turn out to be just another pipe dream. What if I can't do it? He asked, his voice quieter now, vulnerable. What if I mess up and disappoint you? Vanessa's expression softened. She reached forward, placing a hand on his arm. Marcus, everyone starts somewhere. No one is born knowing everything, but you have the right mindset, the right attitude. That's the hardest part. I'll be with you every step of the way, and I'll make sure you have everything you need to succeed. The rest is up to you. Marcus felt a warmth spread through him, a flicker of hope amidst the uncertainty. He could feel the sincerity in her words, the belief she had in him. It wasn't just about fixing cars, it was about proving to himself that he was capable of more, that he could rise above the life he had always known. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt a glimmer of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Excitement. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow breath as he considered the path ahead. It was scary, but what other choice did he have? Stay stuck in the same place, living paycheck to paycheck, or take a leap and risk everything for a shot at something bigger? All right, Marcus said, the words feeling heavy, but right as they left his mouth. I'll do it. I'll work for you. Vanessa's smile widened, and for the first time, Marcus saw a glimmer of pride in her eyes. Good. You won't regret it, Marcus. She stood up, extending her hand to him. Welcome to the team. As he shook her hand, Marcus felt the weight of the decision settle in. But this time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like the beginning of something new, something exciting. The journey ahead was unknown, but he was ready to take that first step. He didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in a long while, he believed it could lead to something great. The next few days felt like a blur for Marcus. After his conversation with Vanessa, things moved fast, too fast, but he couldn't deny the rush of excitement that coursed through him. He had agreed to the offer, and now he was in this new world, surrounded by the finest luxury cars, state-of-the-art equipment, and a team of professionals who seemed to live in a different universe than he did. Vanessa had wasted no time getting him settled. By the time he got back to his small apartment to pack up his things, she had already arranged for him to stay in a guest suite at her mansion. It felt surreal to wake up in a bed with soft sheets and gaze out the window at the sprawling estate below. But the real work had begun the next morning. Vanessa had arranged for him to meet the rest of her team at the restoration garage, the heart of her business. Marcus had never seen anything like it. The garage was massive, almost the size of a football field. Rows of classic and luxury cars lined the floor, some in pristine condition, others covered in tarps, waiting to be brought back to life. He felt out of place at first, surrounded by expensive sports cars and vintage vehicles that looked like they belonged in a museum rather than a mechanic's workshop. Welcome to the shop, said Richard, the head mechanic. He was a tall, imposing figure with a deep voice and a permanent frown that made him seem more intimidating than he probably was. "You're here to restore the cars, but first you've got to prove you can handle the job." Marcus nodded, trying to swallow the nervous lump in his throat. It was one thing to fix an old Chevy or a busted-up truck. It was another thing entirely to work on a multi-million-dollar Ferrari or a custom-built Bugatti. Richard gestured toward a sleek black Maserati, its body gleaming under the bright lights of the garage. "This one's a beauty. Needs some serious work. You think you're up for it?" Marcus walked over to the car, inspecting it closely. It wasn't just the engine that needed attention. The body had some minor scratches, and the interior leather had been worn down by years of use. The kind of work Marcus had never done before. "No pressure, right?" "You've got a good eye," Richard said, standing beside him. "You'll need that here. But fixing these cars isn't just about knowing the engines. It's about attention to detail, precision. You can't afford to make mistakes." Marcus swallowed hard. "I get that." "Good," Richard replied. "Because this is your first test. Fix it and we'll talk. But mess it up and I'll make sure Vanessa knows you're not cut out for this." The weight of the challenge hit him all at once. It wasn't just about proving himself to Richard. It was about proving himself to Vanessa, to everyone who had placed their trust in him. Taking a deep breath, Marcus walked around the Maserati, sizing up the job. The engine was where it all began. He'd spent years working on engines in his small-town garage, fixing what others couldn't, breathing life back into vehicles that were written off as beyond repair. But this was a whole different level. He opened the hood, his fingers tracing the engine, feeling the familiar hum of machinery beneath his hands. He had no idea where to start, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let fear stop him now. This was his chance to prove to himself, to Vanessa, and to everyone else that he belonged here. For hours, Marcus worked in silence, tuning the Maserati's engine, carefully replacing worn-out parts, cleaning every inch of it. The hours stretched on, but his hands moved with confidence despite the knots in his stomach. Every so often, Richard would stop by to watch his progress, his face unreadable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Marcus stepped back, wiping the sweat from his brow. The engine hummed, smooth and strong. He had done it. He had fixed the Maserati. Richard approached, giving the car a quick once-over. Marcus held his breath, waiting for the verdict. Richard didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, inspecting the car carefully. Then with a grunt, he nodded. "Not bad," he said. "Not bad at all, but it's more than just fixing the engine. You've got to make sure the whole car runs like new." Marcus nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'll get to it." Richard walked off, leaving him alone with the car. The words "not bad" hung in the air, a subtle compliment, but also a reminder that he wasn't quite there yet. The world he had entered was demanding. It didn't matter if he could fix engines or get cars back on the road. He had to do it perfectly and quickly. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garage, Marcus finished the last of the adjustments, double-checking the work he had done. He knew he wasn't done yet. There was still a long way to go, but this was a start. He wiped his hands on his coveralls and stepped back, surveying his work. The Maserati was no longer a broken-down shell. It had been reborn. It was no longer just a machine. It was a testament to what he could accomplish when given the chance. As the garage began to empty, Marcus couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. He had made it through the first test. But the road ahead was long, and he knew it would take more than just skill to survive in this world. He would need to prove himself again and again. The days following his successful repair of the Maserati passed in a blur of new challenges. Marcus had been given more projects, each more demanding than the last. But the more he worked, the more he realized just how much he still had to learn. He was constantly surrounded by mechanics who had been in the game for years, each of them possessing an air of quiet confidence that came with experience. It wasn't that Marcus didn't have the skill, it was that the stakes were higher now. Every car he worked on wasn't just a machine, it was a valuable asset to someone who could afford to pay for the best. Every mistake, every misstep, felt like it would be scrutinized under a microscope. Today he was tasked with working on a vintage Rolls-Royce that had been shipped in for restoration. The car was a masterpiece, a rare beauty that had belonged to a wealthy family for generations, and now it was Marcus's responsibility to bring it back to life. As he walked into the garage, he couldn't help but feel a wave of anxiety settle over him. The Rolls-Royce was parked at the center of the room, its luxurious body gleaming under the overhead lights. To most, it was just a car, but to Marcus, it was something far more important. The kind of job that could make or break his career at Westbrook Auto Restoration. Vanessa had been keeping a close eye on his progress, and though she had been supportive, Marcus knew she expected perfection. He could feel her eyes on him when she walked into the garage that morning. She'd nodded approvingly when she saw him working on the car, but there was an unspoken pressure hanging between them, one that he couldn't ignore. "Everything all right, Marcus?" Vanessa's voice broke through his thoughts, and he turned to find her standing a few feet away, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the Rolls-Royce. He straightened up, wiping his hands on his coveralls. "Yeah, just getting started." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "You sure? I know it's a big one, but you've got this. Just take it one step at a time." Marcus nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced. He'd never worked on a car this old, this expensive, and the pressure to do it right was overwhelming. "I'll do my best," he said, though the doubt lingered in the back of his mind. Vanessa gave him a reassuring smile, but there was a hint of something else in her eyes. Was it hope, or was it expectation? He couldn't tell. "I know you will," she said softly, her tone steady but warm. "You've been doing great so far, Marcus. Don't let the size of the job overwhelm you." She turned to leave, but Marcus could see the lingering gaze she cast over the car one last time before she disappeared down the hallway. That look stayed with him as he began his work. The first few hours passed in a blur as Marcus methodically disassembled the car's engine, checking for any signs of wear or damage. He was focused, his hands moving with the precision he had spent years perfecting. But as the day wore on, the weight of the task at hand began to press harder and harder against his chest. Every sound in the garage seemed amplified, every clink of a tool, every hum of the machinery. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not this time. He had to prove to himself, to Vanessa, to everyone that he could handle it. But halfway through the day, he hit a roadblock. The engine's timing was off, and the more he tried to adjust it, the worse it seemed to get. Marcus's frustration began to mount, and he found himself standing over the engine, staring at it as if willing it to fix itself. But no amount of concentration could make the problem disappear. "Damn it," he muttered, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. Just as he was about to take a step back and reassess, Richard, the head mechanic, appeared beside him. The older man surveyed the engine for a moment before glancing over at Marcus, who was clearly losing his composure. "Need a hand?" Richard's voice was gruff, but there was no judgment in it, just an offer of help. Marcus hesitated for a moment. His pride told him to handle it himself, but the pressure was starting to wear on him, and the car was in worse shape than he'd initially thought. Reluctantly, he stepped aside, allowing Richard to take a closer look. "Timing's off," Richard said, his hands quickly moving over the engine. "You're going to need to adjust the spark plugs, then reset the timing on the distributor. It's tricky, but you can do it." Marcus nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He watched as Richard worked through the problem with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. "Don't let the pressure get to you," Richard said, almost as an afterthought, as he tightened a bolt. "It's easy to get caught up in the stress, but you've got to keep a level head. The car will still be there when you're ready." Marcus nodded again, the advice sinking in. He wasn't just fixing a car, he was learning how to deal with pressure, how to keep calm when everything felt like it was slipping away. He had to trust himself more, trust that he had the skills to figure it out, even if he didn't always have all the answers. After a few tense minutes, Richard stepped back and gave Marcus the space to finish the job. With a deep breath, Marcus returned to the engine, this time with a clearer mind. Slowly but surely, he adjusted the timing, rechecked the plugs, and carefully tuned the engine. By the time he finished, the car purred to life, the engine running smoothly, almost as if it were a living thing that had been awakened. Richard gave a grunt of approval from across the room. "Not bad. You got it." Marcus felt the weight of the day lift from his shoulders as the car hummed in perfect harmony. It wasn't just the car he had fixed, it was his confidence. Little by little, he was proving to himself that he belonged here. But as he wiped his hands clean and looked around the garage, he couldn't shake the feeling that there were still more challenges to come. This was just the beginning. The following weeks felt like a whirlwind for Marcus. After completing the restoration of the Rolls-Royce, he had been entrusted with more high-profile projects, each one bigger and more intricate than the last. He found himself pushing harder every day, pouring every ounce of skill and knowledge into his work. As the days passed, Marcus settled more comfortably into his new life. The pressure that had once threatened to drown him started to feel more manageable. Every challenge, every mistake, and every success taught him something valuable. He began to see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about fixing cars. It was about building trust, earning respect, and proving his worth not only to Vanessa and the team, but to himself. One morning, after another long night in the garage, Marcus sat in the corner of the shop, wiping his hands on a rag as the sun began to rise outside. The day felt different, lighter. For the first time in what seemed like forever, he wasn't thinking about the next problem he'd have to solve. He was thinking about what he had already accomplished. He had come so far since the day he'd fixed that Maserati in the garage. The weight of his past struggles, the endless days of fixing old cars for little pay, seemed distant now. He had a future he had fought for. Marcus blinked, taken aback by her words. He had always dreamed of doing something bigger, of having a chance to prove himself as more than just a mechanic. But to hear it come from Vanessa, to know that she believed in him like that, it was overwhelming. "Wait, you're serious?" he asked, his voice a little rough. "You want me to run the shop?" Vanessa nodded, a glint of trust and confidence in her eyes. "I think you've earned it. You've proved yourself, Marcus, not just as a mechanic, but as a leader. You've got the skills, the drive, and the heart to take this company to the next level." The weight of her words hit him, and for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt a deep sense of pride. This was it, the moment he had been working for. "But I'm not sure I'm ready for all that responsibility," he admitted, his voice quiet. "This is a big leap." Vanessa smiled softly. "No one is ever ready at first, but you've got what it takes, and you won't be doing it alone. I'll be here to help you every step of the way." Marcus took a long pause, looking around the garage, the place that had changed his life, the place that had allowed him to prove his worth. He thought back to that day when he had first fixed that Maserati, unsure of what would happen next, unsure of whether he belonged in this world of luxury and high-stakes restoration. He thought of how far he had come since then, how much he had learned, and how much he had grown, not just as a mechanic, but as a person. Finally, with a deep breath, Marcus nodded. "All right, I'll do it." Vanessa's face lit up, her smile genuine and proud. "I knew you would. You're going to do great things here, Marcus." And just like that, everything shifted. The journey that had started with a broken-down car and a desperate mechanic had transformed into something bigger. A new chapter had begun, not just for the business, but for Marcus himself. As the sun fully rose, casting a warm glow across the garage, Marcus stood taller than he ever had before. The future was bright, and for the first time, he could see a path ahead of him, one filled with opportunity, challenges, and the chance to create something extraordinary.